Once in a great while, we are privileged to experience a television event so extraordinary, it becomes a part of our shared heritage. 1969, man walks on the moon. 1971, man walks on the moon again. And then, for a long time, nothing happened. Until last night. That's right, the Battle of Winterfell, after months and months of hype, has finally arrived. And the one question we had, aside from the hundreds about who would live and who would die, was could it possibly live up to all of this expectation? 55 consecutive nights of filming in the freezing cold Irish winter, hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of extras, an entire hour last week just to lay the groundwork for a couple of characters. There was no way it could ever be as good as all that. Could it? Well, let's find out, shall we? Because my name is Adam Cleary, and these are all the ups and downs for Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3, The Long Night. Alright, so just before we start here, I am going to mix up the format of this ever so slightly, because I normally go through sort of scene by scene, bit by bit, and sort of unpack that, decide whether it was an up or a down, but there's only really one scene in this whole episode, isn't there? There's only really one bit, and that's the Battle of Winterfell, so we're going to discuss the broader themes. All going to get very A-level film studies. Going to start relatively understated here and just praise the music from last night's episode. And yes, admittedly, saying that the music in Game of Thrones is quite good is a bit like saying that the men in Ash's DMs are quite weird, but nonetheless, it's just deserving of applause. This is comfortably the best score they have done since the Winds of Winter and the whole Light of the Seven thing. You remember, Kaboom, etc. All the best music in these things should elevate the action around them. Think Duel of the Fates in A Phantom Menace, or all the music from Avengers Endgame, which I'm not going to spoil for you here if you somehow haven't already seen it. I will say, though, that the music should have just stopped for me right as the Night King was approaching Bran. Like, it built, and then it just sort of kept building when it should have stopped to give you a real sense of the dread and the fear. But that is a minor quibble in what was otherwise 74 minutes of near-perfect audio brilliance. So, up for that. Right, now the really good stuff. Okay, so no TV show, either before or now or in the future ever, will face the kind of logistical challenge that faced Game of Thrones for this episode. I've already said 55 consecutive nights of outdoor filming, and they got in the studio for a few more weeks after that. It was just... the scale of it was near impossible. We saw all the set photos, we heard about the budget, it was going to be bigger than Helm's Deep, it was going to be the biggest thing ever on television, it might even be the biggest battle ever in film. On and on and on and on this expectation built, and there was no way it could ever quite live up to all of that. And then it did. Now, I could be here all day picking out all of the individual things, but just where do you even start? The dragon-on-dragon action high up above Winterfell, the sea, almost the wave of white crashing into the ranks of the Unsullied, the Dothraki thing at the start with all the firing swords and they're just slowly going out, everybody piling over the wall, getting in close quarters. It was just, every little bit of it was as huge and impressive as we were praying it was going to be. The scale of it was just, should have been impossible to realize, and yet they actually realized it. Like, Game of Thrones has this habit of setting a bar when it comes to these fight scenes and then just somehow finding a way to get above it. And this is going to be the last big one they ever do. We think the last thing on this scale, and one last time, they did it. It's just impossible to imagine another show coming along and building and building and building, then getting to the requisite levels of budget and interest and popularity to do that kind of thing again, or to at least do it as well as that. We have probably just witnessed the defining moment in this golden age of TV, that battle up. And of course, it's not just how it looks or how it all plays out, it's the actual feel of it. Like, even that opening sequence they went through where the camera's getting passed around all these different characters. We know the war is about to start just past those gates, but yet we're locked in here with some of our favorite characters, and the tension is unbearable. And then from the tension, it begins to let loose, and we get the battle, the scale of it, the excitement of it. Your heart is racing. It makes you feel like you're actually there. And then it keeps hopping between that and almost a survival horror genre. At points, it has you unable to take your hands off your face because you're looking at it all like that. It has you biting your nails. It has you cheering. It has you celebrating. It has you gasping. It does every single thing it possibly can do. It goes from that tense opening to the scale and the shock of that battle to the tense survival horror stuff. Look what it's done to me. Look what it's done to me. It's just the most visceral experience I have ever had, arguably in TV, cinema, any kind of medium ever. Every swing of a sword, every slash of a claw, every breath of some fire, every near miss, every chase, every death, all of it, it makes you feel every last bit of it up. Is a TV episode that feels like it's going to kill you in parts actually a good thing? Is that what I'm saying here? Yes. But here's the thing though, right? I said last week that possibly episode 2 of this season could be considered the last ever episode of Game of Thrones. It was a very different show for many, many years. It was all about the character work and the little machinations going on behind the scenes, and we were about to get instead this fantasy epic. So in a way, episode 2 was the final ever episode of Game of Thrones. But yet, in amongst the sheer scale of the spectacle, in amongst the blood, the guts, the drama, all of that today, they still found room for some of the stuff we really care for. That core human element, which has been the thing that's dragged us all as fans through 7 whole seasons and into this one, is somehow still not lacking in amongst the greatest battle we have ever seen. Jon and Arya, brilliant. Tyrion and Sansa in the crypt, absolutely brilliant. Theon talking to Bran and getting his payoff, the completion of his story, getting his forgiveness there, brilliant. The Hound being afraid to do anything but still rushing to save Arya. Melisandre turning up and doing her thing that she does, where she just says vague things and it inspires people on. There was just loads of this. It was full of this. It was everywhere. And it had no right to be. There shouldn't have been room for any of this, and yet they did it. And I can't be happier about that. So bathe in the enthusiasm of this up. Yes, there are hundreds upon hundreds of extras. Yes, it is just a wash with CGI and just absurd spectacle, but nonetheless, it's the character work that we are here for, and yeah. And speaking of the visual effects, I can safely say I have never been as singularly impressed by how something looks as much in my entire life. Particularly, just want to pull this out, those little shots you get above Winterfell in the moonlight where the 2 dragons are waiting for the ice dragon and everything's just flapping around and it's all gone quiet. They genuinely are washed over me with just reverence and awe. I sat there and just did this. Thing is, let us not forget, Game of Thrones has had criticism in the past for the way bits of its CGI do. Look, we've already seen this season Jon flying through the valley on the dragon and it looked a little bit ropey, let's just say. The first time Dany ever rode one was absolutely terrible, to tell you the truth, but if they've been saving the budget or just saving anything to do it all here, then it has paid off absolutely spectacularly. Another criticism the show tends to get, and admittedly this one is from me quite a lot, is that it has lost its edge when it comes to the deaths of its major characters. But when all is said and done here, Lyanna Mormont, Jorah Mormont, Beric Dondarrion, Dolorous Edd, Theon Greyjoy, and Melisandre all have been at some stages major characters in this show and are now all very dead. Oh, and the Night King as well, obviously, but we'll get to that one in a bit. Of all of these, though, Theon and Jorah are possibly the biggest two. They have had entire stories dedicated to them. They've had their own narrative journeys, which now all feel like they have come to a close in relatively fitting ways. Jorah defending Dany, which is what he always wanted to do, and Theon making amends with the Starks, who brought him up as a child. It does work, and all these deaths add the necessary gravitas to what is otherwise just a massive bloodbath. You need that. You need to have the commitment to kill some of your major characters in this situation. So, yeah. Now, you're probably looking at these scores going, was it really all this good, Adam? Was it really just perfect? And no, it wasn't, because that praise of the characters they have killed also comes with quite a major caveat for me, that it should have been way worse for the good guys. Not necessarily in terms of number, but certainly in terms of stature. Cast your minds back, if you would, to last week's episode, and a whole host of our favourites are sat around the fire, basically bonding over the fact that they've probably not got a whole lot of time left in this world. You've got Jaime, you've got Brienne, you've got Davos, you've got Tyrion, you've got Pod, and you've got Tormund Giantsbane. And Tyrion, supping his wine, sits there and he goes, "Do you know, I think we all might live." Every single person in that room laughs at him. I laughed at him. Everybody watching laughed at him, because there was absolutely no way that all 6 of those people were going to survive. Some of their stories were finished. Some people had fallen by the wayside. They knighted Brienne on the spot, which might as well have just been signing her death warrant. Some were going to be on the front lines. Some were going to be in the crypt. There was just, some will, sure, but there was no way all of these people could survive. And I don't know if you've twigged yet, but they all did. Every one of them, somehow. Now, I love all of those characters. Am I happy they're still alive? Yes, I am. But does this prove the point that when it comes to your favourite characters, Game of Thrones no longer has the conviction to just kill them and be done with it? Yes, it does, unfortunately, and that is a down. At least one of Jaime and Brienne should have died, preferably in the other's arms. That would have been the perfect conclusion to that story. Tormund probably could have bought it in the early exchanges just to make you feel like anything could happen. Varys down in the crypts would have been a good one to kill, so you really bought the idea that the crypts were a terrifying place to be rather than just loads of things running around and nothing actually really happening. How Sam has lived despite just rolling around on the floor in the same courtyard as an ice dragon is stomping around burning everything is beyond me. Westeros did not used to have plot armor, and I'm not sure it's better for having learned where it comes from. That is unfortunately not the only down I have, because while this is clearly a big problem, it's one of the symptoms it then lends itself to that is actually slightly worse. A thing we did not used to get in this show at all, we now get multiple times per episode. If the story you are writing requires certain people to stay alive, that is absolutely fine. That is the story you are telling, but it's what you do with them then that is important, because your major characters do have to be in peril. Those are the stakes going in to episodes like this. You do need to make us feel like they could die, but the most basic way you do that is to put them in situations of certain death, and then right at the last second, you just save them. And for every single thing the Long Night does brilliantly, it does this 2 or 3 times, and it is bad, and it is a down. There are loads of little examples, but the major 2 come towards the end of the episode. They have knocked the Night King off his dragon. He is down there. He is on his own. Daenerys tries to blast him with fire, but he lives. Anyway, Jon then sees him one-on-one on the battlefield. Now, these two have stared down before. We know they're coming to some kind of a clash at some point, and Jon makes a beeline for the Night King. And you're thinking, oh, they're going to have this great one-on-one fight. Ooh, Jon Snow's now in peril. And then the Night King turns around and just starts raising his arms. And all of a sudden you realize this could be one of the greatest moments in the entire show. Can Jon get to him before he raises the dead? If he gets there, he wins the fight for the living. He kills the Night King. That is the end of that story. But if he doesn't get there, the Night King raises the dead and they eat Jon alive. It is just the most perfect, tense moment. And the Night King wins. Except he doesn't, because for some reason all the zombies just stand around looking at Jon Snow until Daenerys arrives at the last second and burns them all away. That is just... And even then you think, oh, it was a bait and switch. Daenerys has saved Jon. He's gone off to get Bran, but oh God, what's happening? All those zombies are climbing on to her dragon. She is now in huge, huge peril. For all we thought this was going to be about her and Jon clashing over the throne, what if she makes the ultimate sacrifice in order to save him? What if they eat her and her dragon alive right after they've saved him? Except no, none of that happens, because Jorah arrives at the last second and saves her. Again. Don't get me wrong, you probably need those two alive. I'm not saying either of them should have died, but just don't tease things like that that could be so big and important and then have cop-out conclusions to them, because that's what that is. It's a cop-out. It's like, oh, nick of time, someone's here, save the day, just didn't see them coming off camera. It's just, I don't want to say lazy, because everything else requires so much effort and is so good, but just Game of Thrones is better than that, or it used to be. Anyway, though, that's the journey of the episode, and it all builds to a head. The one thing that feels like a scene independent from the rest of the episode, the Night King finally gets to Bran. Theon makes the ultimate sacrifice, but finally we have the living, dead main man dude versus three-eyed wheelchair goth raven man. That's kind of what it was all building to. That was the whole plan. And what happens next, I have no doubt whatsoever, will divide the entire fan base of Game of Thrones. Already in the office, there have been people who absolutely love it. There have been people who really don't like it. There are people who loved it at the time, but aren't sure about it now. People who were a little bit underwhelmed when they watched it, but now think that it's brilliant, and that is that Arya, of all people, is the one who kills the Night King. From the very beginning of Game of Thrones, from its very first episode, we have always been reminded that the real challenge, the real threat, the real danger was this one being in the army of the dead he commanded. Yes, it is this great show about political maneuverings and the wheel rolling over in different houses, getting to the top and crushing those below, but it's always been set to the backdrop of this war, of the Great War. Now, what I will say, and this is purely based on my experience of watching it, is that the moment where Arya flies through the air, gets caught by the Night King, has the skill to drop the knife into her other hand, stab him with it, that gets an immediate up. That is one of the best TV moments, one of the most shocking conclusions to any episode of television I have ever seen. It is history-making. However, as I watched his body shatter to ice, and then all of the other whites shatter, and then all the dead just drop down, and the dragon and everything be over, it just felt, just for a brief moment, a little bit hollow. For all that setup, for over 7 seasons worth of building up this idea that this was the real big threat, this was the thing that could end it all, the first time we ever actually get to see the living versus the dead, not just the dead catching the living off guard, the first time they go up against each other, that's it. One stab, done. Yes, this is an awesome moment for Arya. Yes, it subverts expectations. Yes, it is a twist, but none of that necessarily means that it's good storytelling. I, for one, am pleased that the final few episodes will be more about the human characters that we've invested so much time in, but at the same time, this was the big bad. This was the thing at the back of everybody's head, and the first time he goes one-on-one with any character in the show, he just dies in a matter of seconds. What this has done, and you can sit and unpack this yourself and let me know what you think, I'm always on Twitter for these kind of conversations, is it's made things feel slightly inconsequential. Like the War for the Iron Throne always felt inconsequential up against the threat of the Night King, but now that he's been dispatched so quickly and so easily, he now feels inconsequential. So all of a sudden, I've got to put all my emotional investment back into the War for the Iron Throne, even though the show was trying to convince me it's nowhere near as important as the war between the living and the dead. So I'm conflicted. Why did he have 3 stare downs with Jon Snow just to never ever pay off that rivalry? Why was he only now marching south into the land of the living? Where did he come from? Why is he impervious to Dragonfire? These are just all questions the show will now probably not bother to answer as we move into the real final act, and unfortunately that is also a down. So there you have it. Somehow that is the entire Battle of Winterfell, the long night in Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 3, however it is you want to refer to it, upped and downed to within an inch of its goddamn life. Now, my final thoughts on this, and I just want to get this all neatly wrapped up, okay? The spectacle of this episode should never have been able to live up to the hype we all had for it. It just shouldn't have been. It should have been unreachable, and yet it exceeded those expectations. They have made one of the greatest episodes of television, if not the greatest episode of television, ever. But the expectations for what the story should have done should have been so easy to live up to, and they just didn't quite get there with that. It is one of the greatest television episodes ever made, but it's not one of the greatest installments of the Game of Thrones story ever made, if that makes sense. And hey, I said it last week, Game of Thrones as we know it probably ended with Season 8, Episode 2. That was the last time it was ever really going to feel like this show, and now it's just this television monolith that is still brilliant, that is still the best thing ever being made, but it's just the nuance. I miss it, and it's gone now, and it's dead, but hey, if that's the trade-off, if we get scenes like this as a trade-off to that, I could probably just about live with it. Anyway, let me know what you made of it all in the comments below, and of course don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Make sure to subscribe to Got Culture, where we have all our other Game of Thrones stuff, if you haven't done already. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I have, of course, been Adam Cleary, and I'll see you soon.